Cold steel pressed against the billionaire's spine as she stood in line for coffee. One wrong move meant death. Then, she saw him a tired father signing to his little girl. With trembling fingers hidden from her captor, she signed, "Help me." He has a weapon. What he did next defied everything. Vivian Sterling had everything a 34-year-old woman could possibly desire. As the CEO and primary shareholder of Zenith Worldwide, a multi-billion-dollar logistics and technology empire based in Chicago, her life was a curated masterpiece of success. She graced the covers of financial magazines, commanded boardrooms with an icy, calculated brilliance, and lived in a sprawling penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. But on a dreary, rain-soaked Tuesday morning in November, all of Vivian's wealth, power, and influence were rendered absolutely worthless by a 3-pound piece of metal pressed firmly against her right kidney. The man holding the suppressed 9mm pistol beneath the drape of his heavy wool trench coat was Dominic Grayson. 6 months prior, Dominic had been Zenith's chief operating officer and Vivian's most trusted confidant. That was before forensic accountants uncovered the elaborate web of shell companies Dominic had used to siphon $40 million from the company's offshore accounts. Vivian had quietly fired him, opting to hand the evidence over to the FBI to avoid a public stock plummet. She thought she had handled it cleanly. She was terribly wrong. The nightmare had begun exactly 42 minutes earlier in the private, biometric-secured underground parking garage of her penthouse building. Vivian had dismissed her security detail for the morning, craving 20 minutes of quiet solitude on her drive to the office. As she unlocked her armored Mercedes SUV, Dominic had stepped out from the shadows of a structural pillar. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply jammed the barrel of the gun into her side, his eyes hollow and manic, smelling faintly of stale whiskey and desperation. "You're gonna walk with me, Viv," Dominic had whispered, his voice a dry, rasping hiss against her cheek. "We're gonna take a nice, slow stroll to the First Fidelity Bank on Michigan Avenue. You are going to authorize a physical transfer of bearer bonds from your private vault into a briefcase I have waiting. If you scream, if you run, or if you even look at a police officer the wrong way, I will pull this trigger. The bullet will shatter your spine before anyone even hears the shot. Do you understand me?" Vivian had nodded, the paralyzing chill of pure terror freezing the blood in her veins. Now, they were standing inside the Roasted Bean, a bustling artisanal coffee shop situated precisely halfway between her penthouse and the bank. The bank didn't open its vault doors until 9 a.m., and Dominic, paranoid about pacing the streets where a passing patrol car might recognize the high-profile CEO, had forced her inside the cafe to kill the remaining 15 minutes. To the dozens of morning commuters packed into the warm, espresso-scented shop, Vivian and Dominic looked like a wealthy, intensely focused couple. Dominic had his left arm wrapped tightly around her waist in a mock embrace, while his right hand remained buried in his coat pocket, the muzzle of the gun digging a painful bruise into her ribs. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribcage like a trapped bird. Her mind, usually a supercomputer of strategic planning, was fractured by panic. She was acutely aware of her own mortality. Dominic had nothing to lose. His assets were frozen, his passport was flagged, and federal indictments were looming. He was a cornered animal, and Vivian knew with sickening certainty that whether she gave him the bonds or not, he was not going to let her live. He couldn't afford a living witness. "Smile, Viv," Dominic murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The intimacy of the gesture made her stomach churn violently. "You look like you're going to a funeral. People are going to stare. Relax your shoulders." Vivian forced her facial muscles to comply, curving her lips into a rigid, lifeless smile. She scanned the room, her eyes darting frantically from face to face. A college student furiously typing on a laptop, a pair of businessmen arguing over a spreadsheet, a barista shouting out a complicated latte order over the hiss of the steam wand. None of them saw the hostage situation unfolding right in front of them. They were completely oblivious to the fact that a billionaire was standing in the pastry line, moments away from an execution. She needed a way out. She needed to signal someone. But how? A sudden movement would result in a bullet. A scream would cause collateral damage. Dominic would likely open fire on the crowd in his panic. Her phone was in Dominic's pocket. She was trapped in a glass and brick cage, surrounded by people, yet entirely alone. As Dominic pushed her half a step forward in the line, Vivian's gaze swept over the pickup counter. That was when she saw him. Ainsworth Harper was exhausted. But it was the good kind of exhaustion. A 28-year-old high school history teacher and a single father, Ainsworth's life was a chaotic symphony of grading papers, making dinosaur-shaped pancakes, and managing a very tight budget. This morning was a rare treat. It was his daughter Mia's 7th birthday, and he had promised her a decadent white hot chocolate with extra whipped cream before dropping her off at school. Mia sat on a tall wooden stool near the pickup counter, her tiny legs kicking excitedly, a bright pink unicorn backpack resting on the floor beside her. She was a bright, remarkably observant child with a spray of freckles across her nose. She was also profoundly deaf. Ainsworth leaned against the counter, keeping a watchful eye on his daughter. He raised his hands, his face animating with expressive warmth, and began to sign to her. "Are you excited for the museum field trip today?" Ainsworth signed, his movements fluid and natural. Mia's face lit up. She dropped her hands from her face and signed back rapidly. "Yes, Daddy, will we see the big dinosaur bones? The T-Rex?" The biggest ones, Ainsworth signed back, exaggerating the size with wide arms, making Mia giggle silently. 30 feet away, locked in Dominic's deadly embrace, Vivian watched the exchange. A jolt of electricity shot through her nervous system. Before she became a titan of industry, before the boardrooms and the billions, Vivian had been a fiercely protective older sister to a deaf younger brother, Thomas. She had been fluent in American Sign Language since she was 10 years old. Thomas had passed away from leukemia 5 years ago, but the language was permanently hardwired into her brain. It was a desperate, wildly improbable chance, but it was the only one she had. Dominic's attention was momentarily diverted. He was glaring at the menu board, mentally calculating how much time they had left until the bank opened. His grip around her waist relaxed by a fraction of a millimeter. Vivian slowly shifted her position, angling her body so her left hand rested casually against the front of her $4,000 cashmere coat, partially shielded by her large designer handbag. She fixed her eyes on the young father by the pickup counter. She stared at him, projecting every ounce of urgency and terror she possessed, praying he would look up. Ainsworth, sensing the heavy weight of someone's gaze, casually turned his head, his eyes locked with Vivian's. For a split second, Ainsworth just saw a stunningly beautiful, impeccably dressed woman staring at him. He felt a brief flicker of self-consciousness, wondering if there was baby powder on his jacket. But then he looked closer. He saw the stark, bloodless pallor of her face. He saw the wide, dilated pupils swimming in a sea of raw panic. He saw the man standing behind her, standing just a little too close, his hand concealed in a heavy coat. Then, Ainsworth saw her left hand. Resting against her chest, her fingers moved in short, sharp, deliberate motions. It wasn't random fidgeting. It was perfectly executed ASL, constrained to a tiny, almost invisible space. HELP. Ainsworth's breath hitched in his throat. He froze, his hands stilling in midair. He blinked, wondering if his sleep-deprived brain was playing tricks on him. But the woman locked eyes with him again, her gaze searing into his soul. Her fingers moved again, slightly more frantic this time. MANBEHINDMEGUN. The blood rushed in Ainsworth's ears, drowning out the ambient noise of the cafe. The barista calling out an order, the grind of the espresso beans, it all faded away into a muffled hum. His military training, 4 years as a combat medic in the Army Rangers before an honorable discharge and a shift to teaching kicked in with terrifying clarity. Adrenaline flooded his system, sharpening his senses. He didn't see a billionaire CEO, he saw a hostage. He analyzed the man behind her, the rigid posture, the strategic positioning blocking her exit, the unnatural bulge in the right coat pocket. The woman was telling the truth. There was a gun in this crowded coffee shop, and it was pointed right at her spine. PLEASE, Vivian signed, a single tear escaping her left eye and tracking down her cheek. DONOTLOOKATHIM. Ainsworth immediately averted his eyes, looking back at Mia, but his peripheral vision remained locked on the couple. His mind raced through 1,000 terrifying scenarios. If he called the police, the sirens would trigger the gunman. If he rushed the man, he risked a misfire that could hit Vivian, or worse, someone in the crowd. He risked Mia. Ainsworth looked at his beautiful, oblivious daughter, who was happily swinging her legs. The primal instinct of a father screamed at him to grab Mia, sprint out the back door, and call 911 from a safe distance. Let the police handle it. It wasn't his problem. But as he glanced back at the woman, he saw the absolute resignation in her eyes. She knew she was going to die. If Ainsworth walked out that door, he would be leaving her to be executed. He couldn't do it. Ainsworth leaned down to Mia. He kept his face calm, pasting on a gentle, reassuring smile. "Mia, sweetheart," Ainsworth signed quickly. "We are going to play a special secret agent game. Right now." Mia's eyes widened with delight. "A game? Yes. I need you to take your backpack, walk straight into the manager's office right behind that counter. Tell them Daddy said to lock the door and not come out until I say the secret word. Go quickly. Be invisible." Mia, accustomed to her father's playful games, nodded seriously. She grabbed her unicorn backpack, slipped off the stool, and scurried behind the counter, slipping through the employees-only door before anyone even noticed. With his daughter safe, the father dissolved, and the ranger took over. Ainsworth needed to separate the gunman from the woman. He needed a distraction so massive, so disorienting, that the gunman wouldn't have time to pull the trigger. He couldn't just throw a punch. The gun was already pressed to her body. Ainsworth grabbed the scalding hot 20-ounce ceramic mug of black drip coffee he had just been handed by the barista. He turned away from the counter and began to walk toward the exit, his path naturally intersecting with the line where Vivian and Dominic stood. Vivian watched him approach, her heart stopping in her chest. "What is he doing?" she screamed internally. "He's gonna get us both killed!" As Ainsworth closed the distance, 5 feet, 4 feet, 3 feet, he didn't slow down. He didn't make eye contact. He looked completely distracted, fumbling for his car keys in his pocket. Just as he brushed past Dominic's right shoulder, Ainsworth executed a maneuver so flawlessly clumsy, it looked entirely authentic. He violently tripped over his own feet, pitching his entire body weight forward. With a loud, theatrical shout of surprise, Ainsworth flung the heavy ceramic mug and its scalding 200-degree contents directly into Dominic Grayson's face. The agonizing shriek that tore from Dominic Grayson's throat was primal, a sound that would haunt the patrons of the roasted bean for the rest of their lives. The 200-degree coffee hit him squarely in the face, instantly blistering the skin of his cheeks and blinding his eyes. The sheer, overwhelming shock of the pain caused his entire body to seize. His finger, resting tensely on the trigger of the 9mm, contracted involuntarily. Bang! The gunshot was deafening inside the enclosed brick space. The suppressed weapon still cracked like a bullwhip, the bullet tearing through the hem of Vivian's coat, missing her hip by a fraction of an inch and exploding into the glass pastry display case. Shards of glass and mangled blueberry scones showered the horrified crowd. Pandemonium erupted. Screams echoed off the exposed ventilation ducts as businessmen, students, and baristas scrambled for cover, diving beneath tables and stampeding toward the exit. Ainsworth didn't hesitate. The moment the coffee left his hand, he was already moving, his momentum carrying him forward. Before Dominic could wipe the searing liquid from his eyes or realign the weapon, Ainsworth crashed into him with the force of a freight train. His left hand clamped down on Dominic's right wrist like a steel vise, wrenching the gun barrel upward toward the ceiling, while his right forearm smashed into Dominic's throat. The two men hit the hardwood floor in a violent tangle of limbs. Dominic, fueled by desperation, pain, and the terrifying realization that his life was over, fought with the manic strength of a cornered predator. He thrashed wildly, bucking his hips to throw Ainsworth off. "Let go of me!" Dominic roared, a feral, blood-choked sound, as he swung a brutal left hook that caught Ainsworth squarely in the jaw. Ainsworth saw stars. The metallic taste of blood instantly flooding his mouth, but he refused to relinquish his grip on the gun arm. "Control the weapon, control the threat," his old ranger instructor's voice echoed in his mind. He slammed Dominic's wrist against the unyielding floorboards once, twice, 3 times, desperately trying to dislodge the pistol. Vivian had been thrown backward by the initial collision, landing hard against a wooden chair. Her ears were ringing from the gunshot, her vision blurring. But as she looked at the two men grappling on the floor, the paralysis of fear vanished. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury. This man had stolen from her company, threatened her life, and was now trying to kill the stranger who had just risked everything to save her. She scrambled to her feet. She didn't run for the door like the others. Instead, Vivian grabbed the heavy, cast-iron base of a dismantled cafe table. On the floor, the struggle was turning deadly. Dominic, realizing he couldn't free his gun hand, suddenly reached into his trench coat with his free left hand. There was a click, and a 6-inch tactical folding knife sprang open. With a vicious lateral swipe, he drove the blade toward Ainsworth's ribs. Ainsworth twisted violently to avoid the lethal strike, taking the blade through the thick fabric of his jacket and deep into the flesh of his left bicep. Pain flared, hot and bright, but it bought him the opening he needed. Ignoring the knife in his arm, Ainsworth shifted his weight, hooked his leg around Dominic's knee, and executed a flawless jiu-jitsu sweep, reversing their positions and pinning Dominic flat on his back. Just as Dominic raised the knife for a second, fatal strike at Ainsworth's neck, a shadow fell over them. Vivian swung the cast iron table base with every ounce of strength her adrenaline-fueled body could muster. The heavy metal connected with the side of Dominic's skull with a sickening crack. Dominic's eyes rolled back into his head, his grip on the knife loosened, the weapon clattering harmlessly to the floor. The gun slipped from his limp fingers. He was out cold. Ainsworth gasped for air, his chest heaving as he stared down at the unconscious man beneath him. He looked up, his chest rising and falling rapidly, and locked eyes with the billionaire CEO standing over them, her chest heaving. The iron table base still gripped tightly in her manicured hands. "Nice swing," Ainsworth panted, wincing as a fresh wave of pain radiated from his bleeding bicep. Vivian dropped the iron base, her hands suddenly trembling uncontrollably as the adrenaline began to recede. She dropped to her knees beside him, her eyes wide with horror as she saw the blood soaking through his jacket sleeve. "You're bleeding." "Oh my God, he stabbed you." "I've had worse." Ainsworth managed a strained smile, though his face was pale. He immediately looked toward the barista counter. "Mia!" he yelled, his voice echoing in the now eerily quiet, smoke-filled cafe. "Mia, the secret word is T-Rex. Come out, sweetie." The manager's door clicked open. Mia peeked her head out, her eyes wide as she took in the overturned tables, the shattered glass, and the man lying on the floor. When she saw Ainsworth on the ground, she dropped her backpack and ran to him, tears welling in her eyes. "Daddy." "You're hurt!" she signed frantically, her tiny hands trembling. Ainsworth pulled her into a tight, one-armed embrace, kissing the top of her head. "I'm okay, Bug. Daddy's okay. The bad man is sleeping." Vivian watched the interaction, tears finally spilling over her lashes. She reached out, placing a gentle, blood-stained hand on Ainsworth's uninjured shoulder. "Thank you," she signed perfectly, her fingers moving with graceful precision. "You saved my life." Before Ainsworth could respond, the wail of police sirens pierced the morning air. Red and blue lights flooded the large front windows of the Roasted Bean. A heavily armed SWAT unit, responding to the active shooter call, stormed through the doors, their rifles raised. "Police! Nobody move!" The nightmare was over, or so Vivian thought. The harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma bay at Northwestern Memorial Hospital buzzed with an irritating hum. Ainsworth sat on the edge of a gurney, his shirt off, while an emergency room physician meticulously stitched the deep laceration in his bicep. Mia sat in a plastic chair in the corner, happily eating a blue popsicle a nurse had given her, watching a cartoon on an iPad. Vivian paced the length of the small room, a paper cup of untouched water in her hand. The police had finally allowed her to wash the dried blood from her hands, but she refused to leave Ainsworth's side to go to the precinct. She had already given her preliminary statement to Detective Sarah Jenkins, a sharp-eyed veteran investigator who was currently standing outside the hospital room door. "You really don't have to stay, miss." "Sterling," Ainsworth said, wincing slightly as the doctor tied off a suture. "You've been through a massive trauma. You should go home. Rest." Vivian stopped pacing and looked at him. Without her designer coat, wearing a slightly wrinkled silk blouse, she looked profoundly human. "You took a knife from me, Ainsworth. The absolute least I can do is make sure you don't pass out from blood loss. Furthermore, Zenith Worldwide will be covering your daughter's college tuition. Fully funded. Consider it an irrevocable trust." Ainsworth blinked, stunned. You don't have to do that." "I am a billionaire, Ainsworth. I do exactly what I want," she said, a faint ghost of her usual CEO smirk appearing on her lips, but the smile vanished as quickly as it came. Her mind was racing, turning over the details of the morning with the analytical precision that had built her empire. Something wasn't right. Dominic was desperate, yes, but he was an operations man, a spreadsheet fanatic. He was not a tactical mastermind. How did he know the exact blind spot of the security cameras in her penthouse garage? How did he bypass the biometric scanners on the elevator? And most importantly, how did he know that her personal security detail, 2 highly trained ex-Mossad agents, would be dismissed that morning? Only one person managed her security schedule. The heavy door to the trauma bay swung open, interrupting her thoughts. Clayton Reynolds, Zenith's Director of Global Security, strode into the room. Clayton was a physically imposing man in his late 40s, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, an earpiece resting discreetly in his left ear. He looked breathless, his face a mask of deep concern. "Vivian, thank God!" Clayton exclaimed, rushing toward her. "I just got the alert from the precinct when I heard about the coffee shop. I came as fast as I could." He turned to Ainsworth, nodding curtly. "I understand we have you to thank for Miss Sterling's safety. Zenith will compensate you handsomely for your bravery, sir." "He already has an endowment," Vivian said coldly, her eyes fixed on Clayton. "Excellent," Clayton said, turning back to Vivian. "Now we need to move. The press has caught wind of the incident. There are news vans swarming the hospital lobby. I have a tactical SUV idling in the ambulance bay. We need to get you to the secure corporate safe house in the suburbs immediately until we figure out if Dominic had accomplices." Vivian stared at him. The puzzle pieces in her mind snapped together with terrifying clarity. "I didn't dismiss my security detail this morning," Vivian suddenly remembered. "Clayton texted me at 6:00 a.m., saying there was a credible threat at the office, and he was rerouting the detail to sweep the building. He told me to drive myself and use the private garage. Dominic didn't have an accomplice inside the bank. He had an accomplice inside Zenith. Dominic was just the desperate, disposable muscle sent to extract the bearer bonds. Clayton was the mastermind. If Vivian got into that SUV with Clayton, she would never be seen alive again. He would finish the job Dominic botched, steal the bonds himself, and blame it on the fugitive ex-COO. Vivian felt the color drain from her face. She was trapped again. She glanced at Ainsworth. The teacher was watching the exchange intently. Through his years of military service and dealing with teenagers, Ainsworth had developed an uncanny ability to read body language. He saw the sudden rigidity in Vivian's spine. He saw the way she subtly shifted her weight away from her security chief. He saw the sheer, unadulterated terror flare in her eyes, the exact same look she had given him in the coffee shop. Vivian casually crossed her arms, placing her hands against her ribs. While looking directly at Clayton and nodding as if agreeing with his extraction plan, she moved her fingers against her side, hidden from Clayton's view, but perfectly visible to Ainsworth. Traetor, Gauna. Ainsworth's heart hammered against his ribs. Not again, he thought. You're right, Clayton. Vivian said smoothly, her voice a masterclass in deception. We should leave. The safe house is the best option. Right this way, Clayton said, gesturing toward the door, a glimmer of dark triumph flashing in his eyes. He reached into his suit jacket, ostensibly to grab his radio, but Ainsworth recognized the movement. It was the subtle adjustment of a man preparing to draw a concealed weapon in a tight space. Clayton wasn't going to wait for the safe house. He was going to kill them in the ambulance bay. Actually, hold on a second, Ainsworth said loudly, sliding off the gurney. The doctor protested, but Ainsworth ignored him. He walked casually toward Clayton, inserting himself directly between the security chief and Vivian. Excuse me, Mr. Harper, Clayton said, his tone hardening. This is a matter of corporate security. Step aside. I just need to ask you a quick question about that compensation you mentioned, Ainsworth said, taking another step closer, invading Clayton's personal space. We can discuss that later. It's just that, Ainsworth interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly, commanding whisper. I noticed you're sweating, Clayton, and your right hand is hovering over a shoulder holster, which is strange, considering the police have secured the building. Clayton's eyes widened slightly. He realized the teacher was onto him. His hand darted into his jacket, but Ainsworth was faster. Ignoring the screaming pain in his freshly stitched bicep, Ainsworth stepped inside Clayton's guard. With his uninjured right arm, he delivered a devastating palm strike directly to the bridge of Clayton's nose. Cartilage crunched loudly. Clayton stumbled backward, temporarily blinded by the impact, his hand still trapped inside his jacket. Ainsworth followed up immediately, sweeping Clayton's legs out from under him and driving him hard to the linoleum floor. Detective Jenkins! Vivian screamed at the top of her lungs, throwing the hospital room door open. Detective Jenkins rushed in, weapon drawn, taking in the chaotic scene. Ainsworth had his knee firmly planted on Clayton's chest, twisting the security chief's arm behind his back and disarming him of a suppressed compact pistol. He's the inside man, Vivian said, her voice shaking but resolute, pointing at the bleeding security chief. "Arrest him." The interrogation room at the 18th District Precinct smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Behind the two-way glass, Vivian Sterling stood with her arms crossed, watching as Clayton Reynolds sat handcuffed to the metal table. Even with a shattered nose, packed with bloody gauze by the precinct medic, Clayton maintained an air of smug, arrogant defiance. He was a man accustomed to operating in the shadows, confident that the legal labyrinth he had constructed would protect him. Detective Sarah Jenkins leaned against the wall, her expression grim. "He's not talking, Miss Sterling. He's invoked his right to counsel. His lawyers are a high-powered defense firm. They'll be here in 20 minutes with a writ to get him out on bail, pending formal charges. Without hard proof tying him to Dominic's actions in that coffee shop, this becomes a he said, she said involving a decorated former security chief." Vivian's eyes were cold, calculating. The shock and terror of the morning had completely burned away, leaving only the ruthless, hyper-intelligent CEO who had ruthlessly conquered the global logistics market. Clayton had fundamentally miscalculated. He thought he was playing a game of tactical espionage. Vivienne was playing a game of total annihilation. "Detective," Vivienne said, her voice eerily calm. "I need 3 minutes in that room. Alone." "Absolutely not," Jenkins replied instantly. "He's an active suspect in an attempted assassination and corporate espionage. I let you in there, any decent defense attorney will claim witness tampering and get the entire case thrown out." "Detective Jenkins," Vivian turned, her gaze locking onto the hardened cop. "In the last 2 hours, I have legally acquired the mortgage on this precinct's building through a shell corporation. I am currently the landlord of the Chicago Police Department's 18th District. If you do not open that door, I will triple the rent, force a municipal budget crisis, and ensure your pension fund is tied up in litigation until you are 90. 3 minutes. Jenkins stared at the billionaire, recognizing the terrifying, unyielding force of a woman who had just stared down the barrel of a gun. She sighed heavily, stepping away from the door. "The recording equipment is legally required to stay on. I'm stepping out to get a coffee. What happens in the next 3 minutes is entirely unobserved by me." As the door clicked shut behind the detective, Vivian walked into the interrogation room. Clayton looked up, a cruel, bloody smile twisting his lips. "Vivian," he sneered, his voice nasally through the gauze. "You look terrible. Adrenaline crash?" "Don't worry, my lawyers will have me out by lunch. Dominic was a rogue actor, a disgruntled employee. You have absolutely nothing on me." Vivian didn't sit down. She walked to the edge of the metal table and placed a single, pristine, white envelope in front of him. "You're right, Clayton," Vivian said softly. "The police have nothing on you." "But I am not the police. I am Zenith." Clayton's smile faltered slightly. He looked at the envelope. "What is this?" "While you were busy getting your nose broken by a high school history teacher," Vivian explained, pacing slowly around him like a shark circling a wounded seal, "I made a few phone calls to Zenith's cybersecurity division. The real one, not the one you oversee. I instructed them to execute a hostile, deep-dive forensic audit of your digital footprint, utilizing our proprietary quantum decryption algorithms." Clayton's face paled. "Open it," she commanded. With trembling, handcuffed hands, Clayton clumsily opened the envelope. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. He stared at the top sheet, his breath hitching. "That," Vivian pointed flawlessly at the document, "is a routing number for an offshore account in the Seychelles. It currently holds $12 million. The exact amount missing from our European shipping subsidiary last quarter. An account registered to a shell company owned by your sister-in-law." She flipped to the second page. "This is a transcript of an encrypted satellite phone call you made at 6:15 a.m. this morning to Dominic Grayson, confirming the dismissal of my Israeli security detail. You told him to make it look like a botched robbery, secure the bonds, and I'll clear your extraction. You were never going to let him escape, Clayton. You were going to kill him the moment he handed over the briefcase, keeping the $40 million and the bearer bonds, and silencing the only man who knew about the European embezzlement." Clayton was sweating profusely now. The smugness had entirely evaporated. This is illegally obtained evidence. It's inadmissible in court. It's a violation of federal wiretap laws. "I don't care about court, Clayton." Vivian leaned in, her face inches from his, her voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute whisper. "If I hand this to the FBI, they will spend 5 years building a case. But if I leak this to the Chechen logistics cartel you blamed for the European shortfall last quarter, They won't need a judge. They will find you, and they will find your family. They are not known for their adherence to due process. A strangled gasp escaped Clayton's throat. He was trapped. There was no tactical maneuver, no weapon, no legal loophole that could save him from the sheer, crushing weight of a billionaire's unlimited resources and rage. "You have two options," Vivian said, standing up and smoothing out her silk blouse. "Option 1, you remain silent. My lawyers post these documents on the dark web in 10 minutes, and you spend the rest of your very short life looking over your shoulder. Option 2, when Detective Jenkins returns, you provide a full, recorded confession. You detail the embezzlement, the assassination plot, and Dominic's involvement. In exchange, I keep the Chechens out of it, and you get to survive in a federal penitentiary." Vivian turned and walked toward the door. As her hand rested on the doorknob, Clayton's voice, broken and defeated, echoed in the small room. "Wait, I'll confess. I'll tell them everything." Vivian didn't smile. She simply opened the door, stepping out into the hallway where Detective Jenkins was waiting. "He's all yours, Detective. I believe he's found his conscience." 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the Roasted Bean. The leaked security footage from the cafe, showcasing the tense standoff and Ainsworth's explosive intervention, had gone viral globally. Ainsworth Harper was dubbed the silent savior by the media. But for Ainsworth, the sudden fame was a suffocating nightmare. Paparazzi camped outside his modest apartment building, shouting questions daily. His phone rang endlessly with offers. He just wanted his quiet life back. On a sunny Thursday afternoon, Ainsworth was grading history papers while Mia sat on the rug, drawing. A heavy knock echoed. Expecting another reporter, Ainsworth sighed and checked the peephole. Instead, he saw the impeccable silhouette of Vivian Sterling. He unbolted the door. Vivian stood in the hallway, flanked by two massive men in dark suits, her newly reinstated, highly vetted security team. "Miss Sterling," Ainsworth said, surprised, "you shouldn't be here. The press will swarm this block." "They won't," Vivian stepped inside. "I bought the building across the street this morning and allowed them to use the roof for a press conference. I have no intention of attending. They're staring at an empty podium." Ainsworth chuckled. "You bought a building just for a distraction?" "Efficiency, Ainsworth," she replied. Her eyes softened as she looked around the modest apartment, landing on Mia. Recognizing the CEO, Mia dropped her crayons, stood up, and signed with enthusiastic precision. "Hello, brave lady." Vivian smiled, a rare, genuine warmth. She knelt and signed back fluidly. "Hello, Secret Agent Mia." Mia beamed, running over to show Vivian her drawing. Ainsworth watched them, struck by the profound, unexpected connection between the ruthless executive and his deaf daughter. Vivian stood and turned back to Ainsworth. "We need to talk about your future." "Vivian, I told you." Ainsworth crossed his arms defensively. "I don't want your money. The college fund for Mia is more than enough. I belong in my classroom." "And I agree," Vivian said seriously. "In the aftermath of Clayton's arrest, I realized I spent 10 years building an empire of algorithms and offshore accounts, a fortress of wealth. But when a gun was to my back, none of it mattered. The only thing that saved me was human connection, a language I learned from my brother, and a stranger brave enough to listen." She pulled a thick, leather-bound portfolio from her designer bag. Ainsworth opened it cautiously. Inside were blueprints and a charter for a massive, state-of-the-art facility, the Thomas Sterling Academy for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. "I am stepping down as CEO of Zenith Worldwide," Vivian announced calmly. "I'm transitioning to chairman of the board. I am using my personal fortune to fully endow this academy right here in Chicago." Ainsworth stared at the blueprints, designs for specialized acoustic classrooms and cutting-edge tech labs. "This is incredible, Vivian. It will change thousands of lives." "It will," she nodded, "but I know logistics and hostile takeovers. I don't know how to run a school or create a community where children like Mia and my brother Thomas can thrive. The board needs a president. Someone with educational experience, leadership, and the moral compass to step in front of a knife for a stranger. The salary is substantial, the budget is unlimited, and the press will finally leave you alone behind the walls of a highly secured estate." Ainsworth was speechless. He looked at the portfolio, then at Mia, happily tugging Vivian's coat sleeve. He thought about the structural barriers his students face daily, the severe lack of funding. He had the opportunity to tear all of that down. I don't know what to say." "Say yes, Ainsworth." Vivian signed the words as she spoke them, forming a silent pact between survivors. Help me build something that actually matters. Ainsworth looked at the billionaire who had been seconds away from death, now a woman completely reborn. He closed the portfolio, a wide, genuine smile breaking across his face. He raised his hands and signed back. When do we start? The silence in the room was absolute, yet it was the most beautiful sound either of them had ever heard. Don't forget to like this video if this heart-pounding story left you breathless. Share this incredible true-to-life drama with your friends to show the true power of human connection and bravery. Hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss out on our thrilling, emotional stories. What would you have done in Ainsworth's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.